Psychedelics, the next big thing. Please help me welcome Federico Seragnoli, CEO of ALPS Foundation, our moderator for this hour. And we're a small audience, so let's give him a good applause. Thank you. Dr. Med Peter Gasser, President of Säpt.
You? Oh, we are next to each other. Oh.
Tom McDonald, CEO of Clerkenwell Health. Matthew Kurtin, Chief Strategy Officer, Carvin Medicines.
Oh.
And Philippi, CEO and founder of the New Health Club.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you so much for being here. So we are in Zurich in a cannabis conference, and yet this panel would deal with something else, maybe related in some ways. We will speak about all of this. So psychedelics is the subject of this panel tonight. And one thing we will do straight away will be to ask all our speakers to present a little bit their works and their interest in this field. I should start for that. Yeah, my name is Federico Seragnoli. I'm a psychologist. I'm a PhD student, and I co-founded the ALPS Foundation. So it's a foundation, non-profit, called Awareness Lectures on Psychedelics in Switzerland. And our aim is to educate the public to psychedelic therapy and research in an evidence-based way. So that's why, given my young age, I have the opportunity and the pleasure to be here with these people and moderate this panel. So, Peter, please.
Am I to start?
Yes.
I thought ladies first, maybe.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, if you want to start. No, go ahead, you.
Okay, good. Okay, my name is Philippi. I live in Berlin. This is also where the company is. I'm the founder and CEO of the New Health Club. And we started with a podcast about the whole psychedelic new industry in the last couple of years. So a lot of the big names, Peter's still going to be on that too very soon, I hope, are on that show. And so out of this podcast developed, I would say, like a psychedelic retreat or therapy sales funnel, because people started to approach us and asking, where can I go to do this? Where is it safe? Where is it legal? All these questions that are now becoming very important in a whole psychedelic new industry or ecosystem. And so this is something that we're just working on, and how to create a stable system of recommendations for psychedelic therapy and retreats in Europe.
Thank you. Yeah. We will go on speaking also about this kind of guidelines, yes.
Okay.
Please.
Matthew.
Hi, my name is Matthew Kurtin. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of Carvin Medicines. Carvin Medicines is a psychedelic drug development company. We're focused on developing drug products with, right now, lysergic acid, LSD, for the treatment of pain indications. Our company is based, does the current research in Tel Aviv, Israel, as well as we have a manufacturing partner here in Ticino, Switzerland, which is ALPS Pharma.
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely. And I'm Tom McDonald, CEO and co-founder at Clerkenwell Health. We're an organization that's dedicated to supporting drug developers with the designing of their clinical trials, the submission and getting them approved by regulators, and ultimately helping them deliver them through our own sites as well as through academic partnerships with hospitals and so on.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Tom.
So, and now I'm Peter Gasser. I am here from Switzerland. I'm working as a psychiatrist and psychotherapist in Solothurn, a small city. And I am interested in psychedelics. It's now 35 years, I guess, but most of the time it was not possible to work with these substances because they are registered drugs, not for the legal use. And only in 2008, then we started first a small study with LSD in patients suffering mainly from cancer and existential distress. And that was the beginning of, for me, for working with psychedelics in my office. So I'm not a researcher by training. It was my way as a doctor to enter into psychedelic treatment only by research. And then we did the second trial now from 2017 until 21, which was published recently. And meanwhile, in 2014, it became possible in Switzerland to get individual permission for treating with MDMA, LSD, and also psilocybin. And these treatment permissions are, yes, for me as a therapist, an opportunity to do naturalistic therapy with patients.
Thank you, Peter. In fact, it's true that Switzerland on psychedelic research and therapy has really an important place, I think, in the international level, because, of course, there is this compassionate use that we can do in Switzerland with LSD, MDMA, psilocybin, and also there are different universities already working on that. There are even different student associations that are acknowledged and accepted by all these universities. So it's really a fertile terrain to develop this kind of science, therapies, and developments. Maybe since we are dealing with psychedelics within this particular context of Cannabis Expo, one thing I would like to ask our speakers tonight is maybe the similarities and differences or the opportunities that you see maybe in learning from past issues between these two fields, the psychedelic field and the cannabis field. So it's really a large question about these substances, this field, but it's of course for you that are way more expert than me to address and answer. So
I'm happy to give that a quick start, maybe.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth sort of setting the scene a little bit with psychedelics, because I think there's broadly kind of two fields or camps, parts of the industry emerging now, I'd say. You've got the pure play pharmaceuticals, which you could equate in cannabis terms to the likes of GW Pharma. And then I think you've got the more, I wouldn't say recreational, but the retreats and that kind of space in areas where it's been essentially decriminalized. I can't talk to the second point so much, but certainly around the former, the pure play pharmaceutical, I'd say it's quite a different space to cannabis, really. I mean, the similarity is obviously the fact that these were illicit drugs that have a bit of stigma associated with them. When we're thinking about magic mushrooms, they're naturally occurring as well. But beyond that, apart from GW, the route to market for the vast majority of these compounds, I suspect, especially in Europe, is going to be through that traditional pharmaceutical route. So going through your phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials and opening the doors that way. Whereas I think we're starting to see a little bit of decriminalization happening in pockets in the US and bits and pieces in Europe even. But I think ultimately they're going to be two very distinct ways of working. One to treat diseases, and the other one maybe is more around self-betterment and self-improvement and so on. That's my kind of take on it anyhow.
And I think what's interesting on top of that is that it's a matter of, much like cannabis was with developing new drugs, Epidiolex is an example where eventually, big pharma did move in. And I think we're going to see that same similarity happening here in psychedelics, especially for drug products rather than recreational products. And it's not a matter of if, I think it's more a matter of when, because big pharma is required to deploy and scale these products globally.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we've already seen that with Otsuka, who are,
right.
a very large market cap, but not the big boys. But they've already made some pretty significant steps into this and are definitely going to be...
I think that's the first look deal, right?
That was, yeah, they did a partnership with Mindset
Right.
to explore some interesting new compounds.
I mean, I feel like in the last 2 years, the most significant thing I feel I've seen is that a lot of investors moved from cannabis to psychedelics because they were like, oh, there's a much bigger thing going on. That was my first observation. And then another thing is that in the, let's say, mainstream in the group of people who would say like, oh, you LSD makes you like you can get addicted from drugs, anything. So there's not really a differentiation between cannabis and psychedelics. So that's still a lot of people who would put this in the same kind of structure, you could say. And then another thing is that I feel like it's almost like some people in the psychedelic space would like to look at cannabis as a psychedelic, and others are like, no, we have to be really strict. Ketamine and cannabis is not a psychedelic. So that's also something that became very interesting in the last 2 years, that this was a discussion around that, if it's a psychedelic or not.
Right. What's also interesting on top of that is you have cannabis, which is just a single plant and with many different strains. But psychedelics is much more broad. Everyone knows magic mushrooms, but then it's very widely known. You have ayahuasca, then there's a whole slew of molecules out there that fall into the psychedelic family.
Mm-hmm. And you did say a lot of people moved from cannabis investigation to psychedelics because they think it's more people addressing to. What's the reason for that?
You could say there's probably a bigger market waiting.
A bigger market in what sense?
That's just what a lot of investors kind of seem to, say as a. Oh, now we have to look also into psychedelics because there are more substances, there are more compounds, there are more, I don't know, the number of people with depression is higher. So it was a very interesting, especially 2020, I feel, it was a big shift from cannabis investing to psychedelic investing.
Because I think one of the differences of both is it's much harder to give a patient psychedelics because he needs a lot of treatment assistance, of guidance. He cannot take the substance at home, so you need a lot of resources from therapist side. As for cannabis, almost everyone can consume it at home, and even if medical cannabis you can take home, you can take your medicine without having a risk that needs medical assistance. So I think that's a clear limitation for psychedelics. You need a lot of trained personnel to administer then the substance. It's not the substance alone.
Of course, Tom, one of the difference you made out of the out of these two fields is that both comes from illegal substances that now are being medicalized and used. But in fact, as you mentioned, we could really create differences between the different substances. So what do we understand and define as a psychedelic, what not? And it's about this effect on the alteration of the state of consciousness of the person. So that's why basically anybody, we were saying, could use cannabis even at home, but to use a psychedelic creates an altered state of consciousness in your mind that is more difficult to handle, that is maybe more useful to have someone to live it with, to get some therapeutical even outcome on that. So that's why I think we are also here tonight bringing these two fields together. We are dealing with the mind, the consciousness, and tools that let us change the state of that consciousness. Maybe around this we could raise the issue of the ethic. So in this industry, in these industries, of course, there is a lot of players, a lot of investors, a lot of different interests, people that jump in the next train, so to say. These are things that we can really read in media, in the mainstream media. So what do you think about the primal goal that should be maybe taken into account about all of this development? It's a question about ethics and to see basically what is all of this for. An existential question, yeah. A psychedelic question, if you may.
I mean, I think there are two different kinds of ethics beside of ethics of companies that they do a legal job or so. But the ethics in cannabis is much more on the consumer side. The healthy people taking cannabis, what will be the regulation that vulnerable people, for example, do not consume cannabis because they could get a health problem. Legal cannabis, you have to protect those people. Then in psychedelics, we are not at that point. We are at the point, what is the right treatment in a clearly medical environment? What is the ethics of the therapist towards the patient? How can he do the right therapy and the right guidance and the right protection for that people have no side effects of the drug? That's the ethics. It's more in the medical framework. As for the ethics of cannabis, I see is more on a general or a society level to protect those who are too vulnerable to consume cannabis.
Yeah, in a way, maybe the cannabis field is already more advanced towards the public, while the psychedelic is still there.
Yeah, I can very much echo what Peter said. For us specifically with Clerkenwell, it's all about clinical trials. So most of these compounds, I think the most enthusiastic estimate would probably be 2024 maybe for MDMA being approved, and maybe psilocybin the year or so afterwards. But there are, as we've touched on, hundreds of potential molecules that are going to be researched, and we're really in the early stages. But for us as a business, the primary ethical concern is patient safety. These are really quite powerful compounds, and so making sure that, to reiterate what Peter said, that therapy, both before, during, and then following on from the dose, is really quite vital to get right, to make sure that when you're working with very vulnerable patients, they're not getting any worse, and hopefully are getting a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Tom, I think you hit something on the head there when you said that these molecules are very powerful and must be respected. And so what we're doing at Carvin is something a little different, where we're using LSD in a small and micro dose, and the idea is there to match the pharmacology of the drug to the pathology of the pain disease. And because it's a sub dose, it doesn't put the patient in a circumstance or a scenario where an assisted therapy is required.
You would say basically that you are using a psychedelic substance, but in a way that doesn't really entail the subjective experience of the alteration of the state of consciousness.
Right. So what we've done is we found that LSD in specific basically has the inverse receptor profile to fibromyalgia. So with patients with fibromyalgia, they have low dopamine, low serotonin, low norepinephrine, and the way that LSD agonizes those receptors perfectly fits that like a glove. So we're treating pain that is, and the lacking thereof of the agonism on those receptors that will treat the actual pain so that they can go enjoy their lives and then actually start to exercise and get out of that pain disorder in the first place.
I mean, in terms of the, I find it a good question because there was a time, I would say a year ago, we were moving towards a startup structure. And then a couple of months we decided to kind of take a break with this because there's still not the moment where you can scale these therapies or scale these outcomes of these therapies. And another thing I realized, especially in the last, I'd say, year, is that a lot of people start to go to these retreats in the Netherlands and synthesis and field trip, but there's what comes afterwards, which is mostly the most important part often, there's nothing there. So they go home having had this trip. Some of them have no tools anymore to interact with their old surroundings. Or they would say like something like, well, everything is the same, just I'm not the same. So what are you actually going to do there? So, and I feel like the most important thing in terms of, let's say, ethical treatments is that there has to be a really new and very strong structure that once you go on a retreat like that, you need to have like a follow-up for the next, 6 months, basically. And I had the experience by myself like a couple of weeks ago, and a very high dose that I haven't done before. And I was really like, I was looking in the mirror and I was like, who is this person? So it's really necessary that you have like, the moment you get into this retreat, that you already can know the next 6 months I have a support system, a therapist, and so on. And that's a little bit something I find very, I'm not going to say unethical, but surprising that a lot of retreats don't think about that at all sometimes.
So essentially integration therapy.
Yeah, integration, but I feel it's more than that. It's more like you need like almost like an army of people helping you in the transformation, because you cannot do this on your own. It's impossible.
Yeah, it's an important point that you mentioned. I mean, for me, it's the first time talking on a panel in front of a business meeting. So I'm under therapists and a meeting like that. And I was wondering at home, what is my most important message to give here? And I think my most important message is, when you want to invest in psychedelics, you must be aware that it's not only an investment in the substance, it's an investment in the treatment that comes along with the substance, which is part of the treatment, as long as you are treating over the threshold of psychoactivity. So normally we treat, not like you, under it, which is possible. For instance, yes, a low dosage for the treatment of pain. But as long as you are on the higher level on psychoactive action, it is embedded and incorporated in the psychotherapy, which also is a part of the treatment, a part of the cost. It's not only the cost of the substance, it's the cost of the whole treatment.
Yeah, so because, Anne, you were speaking about your personal experience, I had this question coming into my mind that maybe some of the public also is asking himself. Maybe, do you think that to be an investor, a player, a researcher, a therapist, someone that deals with the development of the psychedelic field, to which extent the experience plays a role in that? So if we compare this to the cannabis field, we could go on and ask, for example, the people working there, but have you ever tried cannabis? What did this make to you? Why is there were an effect maybe on that, on you then going on to develop yourself in a professional career in that? So what is your take on psychedelic?
I think it's very easy to answer, because I mean, if you talk to somebody, oh, I had a life-death experience, and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, for example, or I find it extremely hard sometimes to convince, let's say, if you talk about investors, about psychedelics if they've never done it. I mean, it's very easy actually it's not working. Mm-hmm. So you can skip all the investors who are not psychonauts, basically, to make it short. And also like people you work with, I mean, or that are working in your company and with you, there's immediately a whole different situation when they're looking into experiences. And I had 2 co-founders and it didn't work because they hadn't done it. It sounds so simple, but that's what I experienced.
I will have to disagree there politely.
Okay.
Because I think, in that, and maybe it's slightly different in retreats and that kind of field,
of course,
or maybe even delivering therapy. But when you're thinking these are pharmaceutical companies, you want to be attracting the best and brightest minds, in my case, in designing and delivering clinical trials. I certainly don't think that all of my employees would need to have had a psychedelic experience to do that. I think to understand that patient experience during it, absolutely, it's going to be valuable that you've got some people at least that really understand that in detail. But I certainly wouldn't have it as a mandatory entry clause at Clerkenwell.
Oh, of course.
I think it can come a little from the left and a little bit from the right, in that I can refer to my team as some of my team have tried them, and some of my team approach it totally from a scientific and pharmacological approach, and understanding specifically what does the molecule do. And in our case, it's very specific to how it affects receptors and with the diseases. So it can be either way, I think. And at the end of the day, it kind of comes to the same point, where it's about the passion of developing these and helping people.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think it depends on what level. On the therapeutic level, I would say it is really necessary that the therapist has an experience in psychedelic drugs, because that's the normal thing in psychotherapy. You would not go to a psychoanalyst, and this psychoanalyst has never have a special and personal experience in psychoanalysis. That's not the way psychotherapy works. But investing your money in psychedelics does not necessarily mean that you have a personal experience with that. But you should have maybe some involvement in the field. I mean, the field needs money, but if you invest only for maximizing your profits, then maybe that's not so good for the field. You should have some interest and some involvement, that maybe you have to invest for the next 15 years until you get some profits back, and not only 2 or 3 years. So there I think a personal involvement helps, but a personal experience with that drugs, no. But when people are interested, normally they get it. They go to the Netherlands or know some friends who do it underground or whatever. So it's not impossible to get experiences, although they are in Switzerland not legal for healthy people.
Yeah, I guess I asked the question because we often hear about this matter, right? And as we can see, we can have really different opinions on that, and I think I agree with all of them. So maybe to get this discourse further, we call this panel the next big thing, psychedelics, the next big thing. So what are the steps you see now, the more important steps or the next steps to make psychedelics really available as treatment, to make research possible in different parts of the world? We've seen a little bit before a difference between the US, some more decriminalization there, and then Europe, which is a little bit different.
The title, unfortunately, does not say the next big thing for what or for whom.
Exactly.
Is it the next big thing for investors, or is it the next big thing for mental health patients? What for? Maybe I can answer the question on the perspective on a therapist's level. I think it is a very important is an important method, an important help for mentally ill people, and it will be a good tool, and it has a good potential, but it will not change the world. It will not change psychiatry and psychotherapy. It will be one of the options in our possibilities. It will not replace antidepressant drugs, and it will not heal everybody who suffers from mental health problems. So that's my vision or my perspective that I can give. What it is for investors, that maybe it's you to answer, not me. The next big thing on the economic level.
Well, yeah, I mean, I completely agree in terms of in the mental health space. It's going to be another tool in that kit for psychiatry, really. And I think a lot of psychiatrists, even though it's still very early stages in terms of the research, are crying out for a new tool, because there hasn't been any. If we pick depression. There hasn't been any real advances in terms of drugs for 20, 30 years, really. So there's definitely going to be a pull, and I think potentially more of a pull than there was in the cannabis space, where cannabis, is I suppose, I'm throwing my mind back here, but typically pain and sort of depression. But it's quite a light effect, I think, versus some of these psychedelics where we're seeing, with MDMA, I think it was about 66% of people through the MAPS trial, a year after their dosing regimen, were essentially, it's still in remission. So really, really quite exciting and powerful stuff. But as you say, it's not going to work for everybody, and I don't think I'm of the same mindset. I don't think it's going to change the world, but I do think it's going to be an amazing new modality for clinicians to work with.
And I think on top of that I think there's so much more progress and so many more indications that can be opened up with psychedelics. We're just talking about psychotherapy here, but I work with pain. Cluster headaches are big. You see MindMed doing ADHD studies. I recently read an immunosuppressant study that had to do with using psychedelics, how they affect the microbiome. It's much more broad, and I think there's a lot of more research that can and will be done.
I feel like the interest is growing like crazy. I feel like every day I have a conversation about microdosing, where people actively approach us, or like on a random dinner or party, it takes 5 minutes until the topic comes to microdosing, especially in Berlin, I have to say, where it's not a little more open of an atmosphere. But I feel like compared to 2 years ago, people really start to look into this as a very serious tool to work on things that they have not dared to look into in the whatever their age is. It really doesn't matter if they're younger or already older. So, and I feel like another thing that is also very important, the therapy has to become, or the retreats have to become cheaper, because they're still like 6,000 euros sometimes for a simple truffle retreat, a trip where you, of course, guide it, but it's very expensive, for most people not doable. And then, like, in terms of the legal situation, of course, that's probably the biggest thing. But I feel like people don't really care about this anymore. They would actively go to places, travel to places, or order from places, almost like a very decentralized behavior. Paying in crypto, no problem, nobody can trade. Like, so, most people don't want to wait anymore until eventually this might be available, especially younger people, I feel. So, and they're just moving forward with making this part of their daily lives also. So that's totally what we see.
To touch on the investment thing as well, I think we're in the psychedelic space maybe a couple of years behind where cannabis was, where there was, big bubble back in, I guess it was probably 2018, 2019, with cannabis, and then that dipped off. And I think certainly there's been a cooling of hype over, I think probably from maybe this time last year. There was a lot of excitement, maybe overexcitement, from particularly retail investors, I suspect, not realizing that to bring a pharma drug to market is not a 6-month project. You're looking at 6, 7, 8 years of hard work and mistakes and so on and so forth. So I think that's cooled off. But I do fully expect that when some of these compounds start hitting the market, let's say with MAPS in 2024, I fully expect that there's going to be a lot of renewed excitement. And there's probably 70-odd studies going on at the moment that are commercially led.
How many?
This is a little bit finger in the air, but around about 70 different compounds, diseases that people are looking at from a commercial standpoint. So there's going to be this huge snowball of evidence coming out, lessons that have gone right, wrong, and so on. And I think over the next sort of 3-4 years, we'll really start to see quite an interesting shape.
It seems you have responsibility as people really working actively on this field, since psychedelics were already there at some point, right? In human history, in psychiatry, in research. And then basically things drifted off. These substances were made illegal, and the research was also stopped. How do you see the future of this field? Where do you see the risks of another backlash maybe that could be possible?
Good question. I mean, I think a backlash could be possible in the sense that when really bad things would happen, the therapeutics situations which were not safe enough, with people dying during therapy like that, suicides, just in a row. Maybe now not one incident maybe will not cause a backlash, but if it would be, yes, more numerous. We see that with every medication. When the medication is too dangerous, then it is withdrawn from the market. That's not a thing that happens only to psychedelics. You have painkillers had the same thing happen to them. So I think a major backlash could be possible. Maybe not like in the 60s with the hippie and the anti-war movement. Maybe not on this society level, more on a scientific level. I mean, there is a hype, as you say, of course there is a hype with psychedelics, and there is a lot of things going on. And I think, like with cannabis, when this reduces a little bit, and you have to have a more longer kind of time that needs your projects, that maybe makes it more safe in the end, that not everyone wants to do something because the hype is so big. So I think this is a necessary development, and that's not bad for the whole thing. And that's just my hope is that there is no major backlash, that we are really now on a train that is running, and the train finally will arrive at the station in the sense that we can work with these substances.
Psychedelic mental health for everybody. That's the final statement.
No. I think, yeah, it's quite interesting with the therapy element. Sorry to keep going back to the therapy element, but I think that's my main concern for the space. Really, is it's brand new for the regulators in particular. Currently, there's not really a body that knows how to look after this and make sure that it's being done correctly. You've got the EMA or the FDA and the MHRA. These guys are exclusively interested in the drug and how safe that is. So I think that's going to be a really interesting next few years, is how we train up enough therapists, make sure they're adhering to the therapy protocol that they're meant to be adhering to, rather than drifting maybe back into old habits, and making sure that they're doing it in a safe manner. Really is my main concern, but also exciting area that I'm sure some clever people are going to crack.
Peter, did I misunderstood your metaphor of the train?
Sorry?
Did I misunderstood your train metaphor?
The train metaphor means the development of psychedelics into medicine that we can have in our normal medical treatments. This train is running now.
Okay.
We are on the way to it, and if there is not a major backlash, I think that what you just said will happen, that MDMA in 1 to 2 years will be a prescribable medicine, psilocybin 1 or 2 years after, maybe LSD even a few years after. And that is what I think that's the timetable now, but that is only if there are not major backlashes.
Yeah, thank you.
Support everything you said. I think really what's important, and especially for what we're doing as we're approaching it again from the pharmacological standpoint, is that you follow very strict procedures, regimens, and design those accordingly, and follow the strict EMA, FDA guidelines to take a drug to market. And I think that's the most important process. And if we follow that to the T, I believe there'll be success there.
I mean, coming from media, I always had this moment when I think Hamilton Morris explained it in one of the podcasts, that he kind of really described how like one bad article, for example, because some person, you know, did something and had a bad experience, then some, you know, how media worked, and they write about it in a bad way, and that actually this one article could, for example, in America, lead to a change in legislation again. So, or like a rescheduling of the progress that maybe had happened. So, and for example, my biggest concern is, for example, there's a store in Berlin that buys sells a tweaked LSD version. And it's probably not so far away from what Sasha Shulgin, the great scientist, did, but the way it's presented and written about and communicated is like, you would have like, I mean, everybody knows Berlin is a big nightlife city. People would just walk in at the end of the night and would go like, oh yeah, let's do this. And of course, like weird things will happen. And so I feel it's very strongly about putting it in a context where it will actually damage the industry or the ecosystem that actually works on it for people to heal, actually. So, and that is sometimes a very fine line of these Instagram shamans who are they did 3 sessions of ayahuasca and they're a shaman. It's inexplicable to me, but it seems to be very successful. So all these kind of weird mixtures with, yeah, I mean, or like things that could happen around not really paying attention how powerful this is actually, and then landing in media, landing in a weird social media offering that is completely strange. So that is something I pay a lot of attention to.
Right, and I think having any sort of media backlash or even historical understanding or misunderstandings of psychedelics and psychedelics experiences could be a major hindrance, and most likely is a major hindrance, and you could probably attest to this, is that patient acquisition could be very hard because they're expecting something extremely different than what is true, and even making a sub-dose of LSD for treatment of pain, that still has its challenges as well. Just totally perceptual.
Yeah, I think there's quite certainly in the UK, that there's quite a positive push media-wise, I'd say, at the moment, but I'm sure that, as you say, there's going to be some horror stories that will pop up, and you know it will ebb and flow a little bit. But yeah, just got to play it with a straight bat and as safe as possible, I think.
I mean, I think what we can learn or what will happen maybe with psychedelics is the same that happened with cannabis. Like in the United States, it started with medical cannabis. People could get prescription for their health issues. And then a few years later, more and more people tried. I mean, everyone can cultivate cannabis. It's much more easier. But now a whole movement is for non-medical use of cannabis products for so-called healthy people. And maybe the same will happen with psychedelics as well. Now it's psychedelics within medicine. That's what we are developing. But at the same time, a lot of people are waiting, healthy people or not medicated people are waiting for doing psychedelics experiences for human growth or for meditation. And maybe it's coming at the same point that with the development of the medical psychedelic situation will be a benefit for those people who want it in retreat centers or whatever, so that in the end you don't have to go to the Netherlands or to Southern America to get a psychedelic experience. You can do it also here, but that will be a major change then. I think you have to change the legal situation of the substances more than it is necessary now in this drug development situation.
Yeah, I think to wrap it up, whether it is legal or illegal, whether it's cannabis or psychedelics, in any case you need an education on how to use these substances as a patient, as an healthy person that just wants to meditate or to grow and to develop his mind. So I think we have also a responsibility on that part to create very good tools and to share of education tool. I mean, to share this kind of knowledge and how to really use these substances also on the harm reduction side. So we are about to end our time here. So we have still 15 minutes for the public to ask questions. We would very much like to get your input to our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Great panel. So I have a question, like, which do you think is the most likely country to be the first one in the world to legalize the for-profit production and distribution of one of these psychedelics? And which substance do you think that may be? Would it be MDMA, psilocybin, or some other substance? And how long could it take?
Yes.
$1 billion question.
I think we can say that. I mean, that production and distribution is happening. So similar with cannabis, Lesotho, there's I think 2 or 3 factories there that are growing magic mushrooms right now. I know a few people going for applications in the UK. And then, of course, all of the manufacture that's going on for the pharma products as well. That's not for medical. Okay, yeah. For the rec, I think that will, I mean, Lesotho is aiming for that kind of market, and potentially the Netherlands as well, I suspect.
Yeah, I mean, it will be for sure in the United States will be the first country. Sorry?
Oh.
Yes, I think FDA will give approval for MDMA in the next 2 years, and America is the most important market for pharmaceutical products. So every company who has really having an interest on being these substances as a prescribable product go to the United States, because when it works there, it will work in Europe, it will work in Switzerland, and not the other way around. It's not so important to get LSD, a prescribable drug in Switzerland. From there, it's not spreading to the United States necessarily, but the other way around, it will happen.
Yeah, it was on the
mic, please.
non-medical use and commercialization. Yeah.
Okay.
As a party drug.
As a party, in Oregon, at the beginning of the next year, you can go to retreat centers to have your psilocybin experience. In the Netherlands, it's already happening.
Yeah.
The production, but I mean, maybe...
depends what synthesis method you use, I think. So I think some people are looking at, what do you call them, the bioreactors, which has a funny kind of loophole, because the mushroom's illegal, but the truffle isn't, and I think psilocybin itself can sneak through the regulations that way. But it's
so the Dutch law is like the most specific around this. So I think that's why pretty much everything happens there. So like you say, like even psilocybin in the Netherlands is illegal, but the truffles are not illegal. So, but they have this very, very unique kind of, thankfully, system, but it's not applicable to other countries. So I think every country will have their very own way to this, is my feeling. It's not going to be like in Europe, it's not going to be like
but
one fits all.
When that starts in Oregon with psilocybin, so there will be a legal production of mushrooms in Oregon for sure, otherwise it's not possible.
Yeah.
So the production of mushrooms in Oregon, I think then will be legal, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why are you asking the question is also a question. For a friend. He said he's asking for a friend.
Hi, Stefan Mayer, great panel. So mine is very easy question. What about the clinical model? I think we have an issue here, is that the golden arches, double-blind, placebo-controlled, which is what clinical trials should be aiming for, does not fit into psychedelics. Also because after 1 hour in the same room, it's very difficult not to understand who got placebo and who got psilocybin. There is a great documentary by Dr. Gasser in Switzerland, with a Zen Buddhist...
Descending the mountain.
Thank you so much. So, and I'm not a clinician, but I was wondering, maybe for mental health, we should also start to talk a little bit about different clinical models, or what is your opinion?
Developing drugs means all over the world doing controlled, randomized trials, placebo-controlled. And when we started, it was clear you have to enter this model, you cannot, me as a therapist, I would say, no, you should compare LSD-assisted therapy versus cognitive behavioral therapy and look what is better. That makes more, it's more logic. But when you are drug developing, and that's what we are doing, is a placebo-controlled trial. There is no way outside from that when you do registration process. And I mean, it's a contradiction, and we discussed it for 100 times, but you have to show that. I mean, the unblinding is nearly 100% in the studies. It's just one patient who is maybe doubtful about, but all the others know it exactly, even if they have LSD the first time. But it's a methodological problem when you do drug development.
I think one thing that we're speaking to a few different clients about this particular topic, the regulators seem to be quite open because they haven't fully got their heads around that issue. But you can be using some relatively active placebos as well. So niacin has commonly been used. So that there is a psychological, or there's an effect there that a patient can feel. And if they were naive to niacin and naive to, let's say, LSD, they may not know. Additionally, I think you could be looking at other products such as potentially cannabis ingested is going to be quite a long experience, and you're going to be feeling very different to how you would normally as well. So I think there will be some interesting active placebos or even low dose of the active compound that you're testing as well. Those are kind of the main ways that people are trying to get around this at the moment, but it's, like you say, it's not easy.
In the terms of developing a pain medication, which is sub-hallucinogenic, small dose, microdose, it's far easier to have a placebo in that case.
When I did my first LSD trial, this was LSD 200 micrograms versus an active placebo of 20 micrograms of LSD, and I went to Albert Hoffmann and we discussed the methodology, and he said, pay attention, 20 micrograms is not nothing, people will have an effect. And today we would say this was 200 microgram versus microdosing, because 20 micrograms is considered to be a microdosing. So yes, you can do active placebo. In the recent trial, we then took a real placebo, 0.
A curious fact as well, in the MAPS paper on MDMA for PTSD, we can read that a small amount of patients that took the MDMA report having no effects at all, and a small amount of patients that got the placebo reports having crazy effects. So this is also to remember always the plasticity and the suggestion that the human mind can receive from the set and the setting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's an important point.
Thank you very much. It was a great panel. My question goes towards the compounds we might see in the future. So we can see now from first-generation compounds like LSD, psilocybin, to third-generation compounds, so new chemical entities that are developed. What do you think in, let's say, 10 years, how could psychedelics look like? Could it be that you can buy it over-the-counter, that you buy psychedelics where you don't have the visual effects, but just the plasticity effects? And where could that go in the future?
I think, yeah, I mean, there's definitely people looking into that at the moment. I don't think they've quite got to the stage of completely removing the hallucinatory effects, and there's quite a hot debate about whether that then might remove some of the actual efficacy of the drugs as well. But yeah, just as an assumption, if you could, and it still worked, maybe for a condition like, let's say, Alzheimer's or something, because you're doing some neurogenesis, so creating actual new connections in the brain, then I don't see any reason why that couldn't be an over-the-counter, well, maybe not over-the-counter, but certainly something that your clinician could prescribe to you and you take it home. For the ones where they're trying to maybe shorten the trip, which is another sort of big effort, I think, by a lot of companies at the moment, I think that's always going to need to take place in a really safe, secure environment with a trained professional sat with you.
And I feel like in terms of this efficacy, it's like a lot of people now start to be interested in 5-MeO DMT because it's so like 20 minutes and not like a whole day of a trip. But that's also like this thinking is really strange, because what if it doesn't apply to your specific thing that you want to work through? And maybe some people need like a whole 6-hour trip to really reach a point. So I find that a very interesting discussion, like what you actually could choose to make it like super fast and like have like 5 patients a day instead of 1. And honestly, I don't think this is going to work that way. I mean, maybe at one point there might be something. And also, I really don't think that you can spare this mystical experience.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's an interesting thing with these substances. I think it's an old dream to have the magic pill that cures you while you sleep. So it's a little bit this, I think. You don't have to do something on a personal level. It makes the whole job. If this is possible or not, we will see. Yeah. If this is more of a process and a development, and the substances are catalysts for this process, or if there are substances then they really can do the whole job. I'm doubtful about this, but I mean, doubt is a reason for doing research, and I think these substances will show us if they can do it or not. It's very simple.
In one of the foundational research to the psychedelic renaissance nowadays, Roland Griffith in the US gave psilocybin to volunteers to stop smoking tobacco. So it worked with a lot of them. And then he also asked them to quote the meaningful, how meaningful was the experience. And the majority of them said it was among the most meaningful of my life. So we could even find at some point a magic pill or a pill that gets you to stop smoking the day after you've taken it. But why we should get rid of giving also one of the most meaningful experience of their life to the volunteers that take part in this? Is that also in itself something that could bring an interest? Yeah, this is my question.
Good question. Yeah, also, I mean, like a lot of people are coming forward that are approaching us that are not necessarily suffering from, let's say, treatment-resistant depression, but the one thing that they're yearning for is experiences. So you could build a whole new industry on these experiences. What is it actually? Because obviously we don't have meaningful experiences anymore in our culture, and that's why my theory is that a lot of people want to do this, because they want to go back to looking into what their life is about, which our current society or like climate doesn't deliver to them.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, Federico, when you have a pill that stops you smoking without psychedelic experience, that's a good pill, isn't it? Yeah. But it will not replace the experience. There are still some people who want the experience, maybe outside medical framework. There are those who go to the retreat centers, and then you have both. I mean, the tobacco-stopping pill that cures you while you sleep is not a bad drug, isn't it?
That would be beautiful. Question?
Yes. I'm curious. I'm from the US, and I'm not sure exactly how the dynamics go over here, so I'm looking to learn. But there was a question earlier posed about why people were moving from cannabis over to psychedelics. And if we're referring to the American investor market, my personal hypothesis has to do with the fact that there was a real campaign on the part of our government, et cetera, against the people of color. And that's really the baseline of why cannabis was put into an evil bucket, one might say. And psychedelics doesn't have that history and foundation. And so I think that investors were more comfortable moving into a psychedelic realm because it didn't have that underlying racial tension. Now, I don't know how it works over here, and I'm just curious, that decriminalization effort, et cetera, wondering how that impacts your decisions over here if you feel that underlying tension.
I'm sorry, the underlying tension between what bit? Sorry, I missed that. Races? I certainly don't. I think one of the challenges with research is, specifically psychedelic research, has been very white middle class in terms of the participants taking part in the studies. And that's our job as a research organisation to improve. So in terms of our recruitment, we've got a bunch of different ideas how we're going to do that. And yeah, with things like social media now, you can be hyper-targeted in terms of areas, types of people, etc. So we're trying to make sure that our studies are going to be very, very representative.
I think here in Switzerland it's another mechanism because we have not so many people of color in Switzerland, and yet it was highly criminalized as well, the consumption of marijuana. And the investors didn't feel comfortable to invest in psychedelics until 3 or 4 years ago, before there was no touching by investors. So I think marijuana was the first step into decriminalizing all these scheduled drugs, and now the psychedelics are following, and we have a thing like the psychedelic renaissance, so there's a huge interest, and that helps one in each other of coming out of this corner. Here was criminalization more like for people of not so well educated, young people, outsiders, anti-establishment movement, which was not racist in that sense. It was more anti-establishment for maybe.
I think one other thing that I've noticed with investors when we've been going out trying to raise money was that they prefer psychedelics because it is, certainly where we're playing, it's a pure pharma play. There's no, we're doing this with one eye on the recreational market, which I think was a big thing in cannabis, right? We can make a business in medical, but party time when it goes recreational. Whereas for us and most of our clients, that's not the case. The bigger market is going to be the medical one, because people can grow mushrooms for pittance if they want to do that, and you know.
And to piggyback on you, Tom, a lot of the research in psychedelics came from top institutions versus cannabis, where that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
But I mean, I feel like also at the same time, of course, in a different way than America, but topics like racial trauma or intergenerational trauma or epigenetic trauma, these topics are really pushed by psychedelics and are kind of addressing, I mean, you know, Europe never wants to admit that it has a problem with racism. It just looks different than in America. But for example, all I can say, like the whole discussion around the Holocaust in Germany will be deeply affected by a psychedelic knowledge around this epigenetic trauma. And I'm pretty sure as well as the topics that, let's say, around other diverse people coming to Germany, for example, years ago, like Turkish people, Italian people. So their third generation, they kind of start to realize that there is something there like racism in their lives. They just, you know, were maybe not able to talk about it. It was just a normal conversation maybe at home. So, and I feel like since psychedelics are in the game, these topics get real, are kind of coming to the surface. They're just coming up right now, I feel.
Thank you so much. In fact, of course, with 1 hour time, we could only scratch the surface of many, many, many different things that would need our attention. And I would like to thank the speakers to being here and having the possibility to share with us their opinions. And thank you for this event. Thank you for your questions. And I think we will have some other small time here to discuss privately, if you wish so. And I wish everybody a good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.